Lilith Foxx is a board-certified sexologist, an ASECT certified sexuality educator, professional speaker, coach, and diversity, equity, inclusion consultant. With a background as a BIPOC, queer, neurodivergent, kinky, and polyamorous individual, she brings a multifaceted perspective to her work. Lilith is a graduate of the famous Kinsey Institute at Indiana University's Human Sexuality Program and is certified by Johns Hopkins University in psychological first aid. Her work emphasises the intersectionality, these are very long words, of marginalised identities, disability inclusion, and social justice within alternative sexuality. Before transitioning into sexuality education and consultancy, Lilith had a very successful decade-long career in digital marketing, working with businesses ranging from startups to Fortune 500 companies. She continues to leverage these skills to support sex-positive and adult industry businesses. I think there is a shorter description of Lilith on her website. Hope you won't mind me reading it out.
No, I love it.
Lilith is an impudent, shameless, morally unrestrained, raven-haired Jezebel. I hope you have that printed up on cards and hand it out to everywhere. With a current count of 132 plants, I'm sure it's more now, and 10,876 white cis men pissed off, I am pleased and thrilled to welcome Lilith to the podcast. I think you're going to be fairly unique. How can you be fairly unique? A unique guest. As I more about you today, I listened to some of your other podcasts today and stuff, and yeah, I love how open and willing you are to communicate.
Thank you.
I just wanted to start by taking you back a little bit, if that was okay, to understand what your upbringing was like, your formative years. Are you a very different person today than you were then? Is there a direct link between the person you were then and the person you are today?
Yeah, so night and day difference from when I was younger. I actually grew up in the daughter of immigrants, very conservative household. We didn't talk about sex. I mean, that just wasn't a topic talked about. My mother barely told me about periods when I was coming of age, let alone anything else. And so what I am now is a complete like 180 from then. Excuse me. And so like, could I have imagined the career that I have now? Absolutely not. I didn't even know that was a possibility for me. I wish I did. I would have started sooner.
So were you always curious about sex and intimacy as a teenager, or it just didn't cross your mind really?
Yeah, absolutely. I was very curious. I always felt very fascinated by the power that sexuality held, both like an internal power and external. It was something that it was so taboo, but at the same time, it was everywhere. And so I never quite understood that contradiction that it always felt like. I mean, to sell a bar of soap, they, have the naked person all sudsed up and everything. And so that to me was always something very interesting and very confusing at the same time. And so I think that just kind of drew me more toward it, at the very least, to learn about it. And we didn't get sex education in school, not really. The most that we learned, we had the mother of, I think, one of the football players come in one day, and she chose like 4 of the boys and had them line up in front of the stage. She stuck a piece of tape to one kid's arm, pulled it off, went to the next. And by the third guy, the tape wasn't sticking anymore. So she said, "See, girls, after a few, it's not very useful anymore, is it?" And that was the sex ed that we got. So yeah, isn't that horrifying? And so
Wow.
I had friends who didn't know about sex, who didn't know about periods. And so I became that friend that they went to with questions. And once I saw that was the education we were going to get, I took it upon myself to learn more.
I just love the thoughts of some people from your school going to their first sexual encounter with a roll of tape. I'm like, I've got the tape. Do we start now? It's so bad, isn't it? I mean, I thought ours was bad. So ours was at least we had a sort of condom on the banana thing. We had quite a bit about avoiding STIs and not getting sexually transmitted diseases, and avoiding pregnancy. That was about it, really. So my children are 15 and 18. I hoped it changed massively since then. They said, well, not really. There's a bit more about consent now, which is great, which is a start. But
yeah,
I said, well, do you learn about different types of sexuality, about intimacy, about sensuality, about polyamory, about kink, about anything? Like, no, not at all. But they obviously learn about it, but from
Friends, media, and porn.
Friends, internet, whatever else. And it's interesting what you said about the bar of soap and stuff. And I think that's an old sort of marketing adage, I guess, that sex sells. Whether it's a car, used to be a packet of cigarettes, used to be a vacuum cleaner, whatever. Just sex sells, really. And I don't think that's got any better. If you look at any supermarket checkout, all the magazines are not representative of people. Most porn isn't really representative of most people, but people see that as an idealized version of themselves or what they want to be and aspire to that, and it's not realistic, and it's can cause a hell of a lot of issues. We'll come on to that. But so you were at school, you were curious, you wanted to learn more about life beyond the piece of tape. So where did your education come from at that stage?
So where did my sexual education come from?
Yeah, where did you learn if not at school?
Initially, the internet. I just went on, I looked at things, I read as many books as I could get my hands on, which was really hard to come by because my parents wouldn't buy them. So I would go to the bookstore and I would read them at the bookstore and then buy the book that my parents wanted me to get. So I would kind of read snippets of things as I could. And I was at the bookstore maybe once a week so that I could read as much as I could. Or the library. The library had a much more limited selection of sexuality books. And then the rest of it I learned just from being a, teenager and young adult fumbling around.
And were you very confident in your own body and your own sexual being at that stage?
Initially, no. I survived sexual assault when I was 16, and to have my sexuality then used against me in that capacity and have that power taken was the biggest shock to my system. I had no idea how to contend with that. I had no idea how to wrap my head around that because it was this elusive thing, sex, and now it was used against me. And so it took me understanding that I was going to be slut shamed for it regardless and blamed for it regardless, that I might as well use this power to myself. And that actually is what drove me into kink, because I could recreate scenarios. I could be in these situations, but that were fully consensual, and the power was therefore in my hands. And so I came more into myself, I would say probably in my late teens, early 20s. And that was about the time when I went into kink as well.
How would you define kink?
So I had a therapist who I was working through the sexual trauma with him, and he just kind of offhanded said something about the kink community and that consent is part of the kink community. And I was like, kink, what's that? So of course I went to the internet and I was just in shock and awe at the same time. I was like, this is terrifying, but I'm intrigued. And why is that? And so yeah, that's how I learned about it. And then I went onto the internet and looked up, and I found fetlife.com, which is like the social media of kink basically. And I found events that way and groups that way. And I went to my first event when I was 20.
And was it what you expected?
Not at all. I actually had a horrible experience. I went in, I was probably the youngest by decades. I was immediately the fresh meat in the whole environment. One of the first things somebody said to me, now they meant it as a compliment, but at the same time, it is a microaggression. They made a comment about my skin tone and my race. And they were, they said something like, "Oh, you're really exotically beautiful." And I'm like, well, that's a bit of a harsh, a harsh compliment, but okay, I'll just take it as it's meant. And then not moments later, this woman who I'd never seen before, never spoken to before, came up to me and said to me, "You don't belong here, skinny bitch." And she walked away. So I left in tears. And then I didn't come back for a few years. And it was later on, I had a friend who wanted to learn about rope bondage, but his wife was a paramedic. And so she was always working, but she and I had very similar body types. And so he said, platonically, "May I tie you up so that I can learn to practice on her?"
Yeah, that
So I said, "Of course. Yeah, absolutely. Why not?" And so that was my foray into the kink community. It was probably a couple years later. And then I was able to kind of enter in a more friendly environment that was, and rope tends to have people that are younger in it. So I was amongst people my age, and it felt more, felt safer for me at the time.
Yeah, it is a. I'm not sure if to describe it the right way. Certainly, if you look at some of the shibari that people do, some of it is so beautiful.
It
It sounds
is.
silly, but I've seen some just stunning photographs of people sort of tied up in certain positions with a beautiful red rope, and then even when the rope is untied, the sort of beautiful marks that it leaves. And some people wouldn't say it's beautiful, but it really is, and yeah, it just people say, "Oh, you're just saying that." It really does feel like art more than anything else. So I think really, you don't really read much about shibari. You've got to sort of know about it to go and find it and stuff. And it's not. I guess people think a lot about BDSM, and they sort of almost extrapolate what to think about BDSM as to everything else. So ropes are used to tie somebody up to beat them, as opposed to no, the rope is the thing itself. So
Yeah.
I find it, yeah, that's it's quite odd. Yes, so your friend's husband introduced you to it as you were masquerading as his wife. Okay, it's a good place to get into though. So you were going through all of this. You were working in marketing. You were doing sort of high power marketing stuff, and then you sort of obviously exploring more of yourself. You, I'm sure, going to different events and meeting different people, and it's exploring what you enjoyed. So at what stage did that passion and interest cross the border to becoming, now this is what I need to do. This is who I am. And I say that very, very intentionally. I don't think many people think, well, yeah, I will go and do that. It almost feels like a calling in a way. People in this space almost need to do it. So when and how did that happen?
So I can tell you exactly when it happened. It was August 2022, and I was in Mexico City. As very specific as that is. Before that, shortly before that, I had been asked to teach within the kink community, since at that point I'd been in for about a decade. And so I said, well, yes, but I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to teach sexuality, but maybe I can learn. Surely there's a class somewhere. Surely there's something. So upon my Googling, I discovered ASECT, which is the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists. And I discovered their certification program, which is quite extensive. It's like a master's degree, effectively. And I thought to myself, oh my God, I need this. This is what I've been looking for. If I get this, then I'll be able to teach sexuality. It's perfect. And I'll be able to do it for this class. And I didn't think of it beyond that at that point. And then I discovered through trying to find ASECT, I was looking for CE providers to take a class. And I discovered this class titled Let's Make a Lesson Plan. And it was taught by the Sex Ed lecture series. And taught by this brilliant, wonderful woman named Dr. Tanya Bass. She has so many letters behind her name, I think more than are in her name. And she was just this exuberant force of life. And taking the class, I was just entranced by her. I was entranced by her, all that she was teaching. And I just thought to myself, I want to be whatever she is. And so I looked her up. And sure enough, she was a sexuality educator and really good at that. And so I thought to myself, this is actually a career I could do. Well, this is really interesting. And so I tried to do it at the same time of doing marketing. But then when I went to Kinsey and I had people in my class, there was half online, half in person. I was in person. There was a few people online that were in Russia, literally in the side of the war zone, who were taking this class in secret. They had to have their cameras off for their own safety so that they could teach their communities. I kept thinking to myself, if they're risking their lives to do this, I can't possibly keep living this double life. I have to put myself fully into this. And so it was right around then. That was November of 23 when I made the decision to fully jump over.
And have there been any times where it hasn't felt like the right decision?
Sorry?
Have there been times where it's felt like the wrong decision, or it's always felt like the right?
Not at all. It's felt like the right decision every step of the way, even when I'm struggling for work, even when I'm having those moments of, well, I've had a really good marketing degree, or a really good marketing career rather, and I made a lot more than I do now. Did I really make the right decision? I sometimes just ask myself that objectively, and every single time the answer is yes.
It's what we dream for, isn't it? We dream of finding the thing. So few people do, but
yeah, I'm lucky.
Depending on your beliefs, we have one life, and why not live it to the best ability you have, really. So how would you describe what you do, and probably a more difficult question, and who you are today?
Yeah. So funny enough, I have different versions of my job description because immediately telling people that I teach kink and polyamory invites a certain level of assumption on their part. And sometimes I just don't want to deal with that. I want to have my work life separate. So I say that I'm a sexuality educator and I keep it at that. But for most people, I want to create that visibility that these communities are valid and that it's okay to be completely yourself. And so I will say that I teach sexuality to adults, I teach kink, I teach polyamory, alternative sexuality, and disability inclusion within all of that. And how would I describe myself? I think raven-haired Jezebel sums that up. No, how would I describe myself? That's such an interesting question because it's one I've always kind of struggled with. I think I would describe myself as a passionate person who puts so much of myself into everything I do, whether I want to or not. And I bring that passion to all parts of my life. I would call myself funny. I think I'm charismatic at the very least. So those things I would say.
I can see that for sure. You said something almost that preempts this next question. So what do you think some of the common misconceptions are about BDSM, kink, polyamory, and different types of sexual experience?
So for BDSM, the immediate misconception is that it comes from trauma, and that's actually not true. Studies have been done on the kink community, and they're, just as normal as the rest of us. If nothing else, they're much more intentional about sexuality and consent and everything else. With polyamory, of course, that assumption of promiscuity is there. And the same with alternative sexuality. The whole assumption is that there's something wrong with the person and that's why they're seeking this out. But the reality is that's absolutely not true. They just are authentically themselves, however they express that. And it's always so funny to me because the people who are most against alternative sexuality tend to be the most intrigued with it. And
of course.
It's such a mask they put on, and I feel pity for them because I'm like, I know that you want to explore this, but something in you is not allowing you to.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry for you.
Yeah, I've learned quite a lot doing these podcasts and out of personal interest. And I think one that's really interesting to me is I think BDSM for lots of reasons. And I think the one thing I've learned over the last few years about BDSM in particular is that part of the turn on and almost the process of BDSM is the communication, the agreement, the contract, if you like, whether it be verbal or not, whether it's so this is yes, this is a no, this is a maybe, it's red, it's yellow, and I think maybe people will be surprised, but I think don't think there is so much more communication in a BDSM experience than there is in a standard sexual encounter. And so often I know if we go onto a dating app and we pick somebody up and go home with them and we have sort of sex with them, there's no real knowledge about how somebody's felt that experience has gone. Yes, one or more people might have orgasmed and they might think, well, that was satisfactory, but it's interesting. And on your website, you can sort of download a sort of almost a review of an experience of a kink event, of a BDSM event, which I really enjoyed reading through. It sort of helps you really explore what you got from that. Was it what you thought? How did you feel? What was the emotion? And helps for the next time. And I think that's something that almost the sort of straightest, most heterosexual standard sexual experience could learn from is having that communication. So I think that's one of the hardest things that we struggle with as humans is communicating. We don't seem, especially about sex and money, are two things we just don't talk about.
Yeah.
And for sex in particular, I think if you've perhaps been in a relationship for, and it could be a month, could be a year, could be 10 years, could be 20 years, and you once upon a time did something you enjoyed at the time, but don't enjoy now, or did something you didn't really enjoy, still don't enjoy it now, wants to try something new, we find it very hard to tell our partner or partners about those things. And what do you, I mean, first of all, what do you think about what I just said? And then secondly, how can we get better at actually communicating and asking for what we want?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, it's really important to communicate with ourselves first.
Okay.
We have to understand kind of where we're coming from, because I think often the people that, even the best intended people who want to communicate, haven't had that conversation with themselves to really understand what it is they want and what the call to action is, so to speak.
Mhm.
So they go to their partner and it's more accusatory. It's like, well, you never do this, you never do that. And it's not I'm feeling this way, here's how I need help. So I think that conversation with yourself, be it through journaling or even just practicing in the mirror, however you want to do it, I think that's the most important part. Because sometimes when we begin to kind of journal it out, when we begin to kind of think it out, we realize that what we're thinking we want isn't actually the issue. It tends to be something much different, or it tends to be that what you are actually seeking from your partner isn't what they may assume because you haven't communicated to them how it is you're feeling. So it's really important to have that conversation with yourself first. And then, I'm sorry, what was your first question? What did I think about this?
Yeah, just then you answered. I think just the fact that the BDSM kink community seem far better at actually communicating, reviewing, almost having the sexual events and experience as part of life, as opposed to something that's quite distinct from life. That makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree with you. I think that the communication that I've gotten in BDSM communities, even about the most vanilla of topics, like where do we go for lunch, is so much more intentional and so much more seeking out communication. It's very, they want to make sure everybody has spoken, everybody has given their consent effectively to everything we're doing. And you don't see that kind of consent being modeled everywhere in life, like outside of the kink community, really. Everything they do is intentional. Everything they do is, I should say, everything we do is very communication forward. So yeah, I would completely agree with you there that it's much more communication and consent focused.
I think that's one of the challenges that I think, in particular, young people have when they're exposed to, I guess, traditional porn at a very early age, where you can go on and see anything. I think the representation of BDSM or kink or anything really, you never hear that time where they're talking about consent, or it just seems to be straight into typically on the big porn sites, the porn hubs or whatever. It's a minuscule clip of something, and you haven't seen the whole thing. I mean, there's some great porn out there. I talked to Inka Winter, who directs for Foreplay Films. There's a beautiful, she calls it holistic porn, some beautiful consensual feminist porn. That it's hardcore porn, but it's such a turn. It's very cinematic. Whereas Pornhub, if you're a 13-year-old boy and your first experience of that is, okay, well, all women have no body hair, all women want their guy to have a huge cock and to go on for hours and hours, and they're happy with having 3-4 people in the room at the same time. It's, in my experience, that's not typical reality. And it's how do you help people say, well, actually, that isn't what sex is about. That isn't what BDSM isn't just about having somebody tired of being beaten without any prequel or afterthought to it. So it's, yeah, I think porn is, I'm nothing against porn, but I just think if it's seen as an education tool as opposed to entertainment, it's quite different.
Yeah. I think we often turn to it because it's all that we have. Sex is not talked about. And so I think porn needs to be part of the conversation. We need to say that this is entertainment. This is not This is not education. They are sexual athletes. Most people cannot perform like that. Most people do not exist like that. They probably don't even exist like that outside of the scene. And so that's why it's so important to have these conversations about sexuality preemptively, before somebody goes and learns something in porn and potentially gets hurt. And unfortunately, we don't have those conversations. It's so taboo.
Mm. I want to talk to actresses or directors in the industry and talk to actresses and say, look, what you see on screen has been, we've stopped 6 or 7 times. The guy's taken another tablet to get hard again. We've paused again. We've gone again with different angles. So really, it isn't. We're not just being filmed for like an hour straight where it's just on and on and on. It really isn't. It takes a whole day to get a 20-minute scene in the can. So the whole illusion of porn, I guess, is yeah, that's what it is. It's an illusion. That's what people want to come across. One of the other things you said before was that when you first introduce yourself, you might say, I'm a sort of sexologist, I'm a professional sex coach, sex advisor, and sort of trying to avoid some of the other terms until you know who the clients are. So a couple of people I've talked to lately have been sex workers, and all of whom have been absolutely amazing and wonderful and delightful and yeah, very intelligent, very thoughtful, very intentional with what they've done. And I wondered how you address the stigma that still surrounds sex work when you're talking to people or when you're advocating for individuals.
Yeah, so that's one of the things that I actually just go for. I don't sugarcoat it, because I think that sex workers have been discriminated against for, as long
Right.
as time has gone on.
Yeah.
So the time is now to just be direct with it. One of the things that I often say, there's actually a class that I co-teach with a colleague of mine, and it's called Sex Work Unveiled: The Lives and Laws of Sex Workers from Past to Present. And one of the things I say in that class, and I always love looking out at the audience when I say it, because you can see people squirm. I say, you can't be pro-choice and anti-sex work. And you just kind of see the wheels turning, and people squirm a little, and they start to get uncomfortable with that. And every single time I always have somebody say, well, what do you mean? And I say, well, I mean exactly what I say. You can't be pro-choice and anti-sex work. Simple as that. It is a contradiction to say that you are pro-choice for women and people to do whatever they want with their bodies, but at the same time be anti-sex work. Sex work is work, and that's just the end of it.
Do you think people are uncomfortable or sensitive because there's perhaps a perception that female or male sex workers aren't doing it out of choice, and it's something it's been like people in porn. Some people think everybody's forced into it, and I'm sure there are some terrible instances where that happens. But everybody that I've talked to, first of all, enjoys what they're doing, either sex work or porn, and has a career plan, has a trajectory, has a target, etc. And they see it is work. They get exhausted. They pay taxes. They have to do all the other crap we do in life. But do you think part of it is that maybe there's a thought that people wouldn't choose to do that, would they?
Yeah, it's often conflated with sex trafficking, and it's really unfortunate that so many campaigns have been, well, their intent is good, because they're wanting to stop sex trafficking, but they're doing it in such a way that is harming sex workers. And the reality is, if you allowed sex work, if you regulated the industry, not only would you keep sex workers safer, you would start to bring an end to human trafficking, because that's what the problem is when you have something kind of living in the shadows like that, something that's not going to go away. It is the oldest profession.
Yeah.
You're going to have much more like bad actors also in it. But when you regulate it, there's a less of a chance of that occurring. Now, of course, like for example, in the state of Nevada, where it is legal, there are absolutely instances in which even legal sex work is exploitive.
Yeah.
You have your brothels that management is exploiting them, but also when you think about it, a waitress at like a restaurant probably gets exploited as well.
Yeah.
And so, it's really a matter of, why are we looking at this differently just because it has the veil of sexuality over it? When you take the sexuality component out of it, it's a job like any other. I mean, we get exploited working in offices where, working long hours and everything else. Under capitalism, we're all exploited.
Yeah, and and to your point, and I hadn't heard it put that way before, but I'm going to use that line now. So if you are pro-choice, then we are trusting you to make a very important decision, and you can't possibly think that, well, if they can decide that, then surely they can decide what to do with their own bodies for their own sake, really. Now, I think that's why I like the premise of an OnlyFans kind of thing, where the content creators, seem to have much more control over what they're doing, and it's very direct. They can talk to or not talk to people. They can create custom content. They can do whatever, but they seem to be very much in control, as opposed to, I guess, the more traditional sex industry, which is a huge male-dominated corporation owned by, it's all about collecting data. It's a massive, massive business, but the actual talent is poorly paid and has to sort of jump when, say, there's a scene to do tomorrow, or there's scenes to do, this scene's that scene. Whereas with an OnlyFans or other things like that, they can actually choose what to do. Are you in favor of that kind of platform?
Oh, absolutely. I think the rise of the internet brought a safety for sex workers. They're able to screen their clients much more easily. The problem is we then have laws like FOSTA SESTA that limit the sexuality education and anything sexual that can be placed online, because it makes the platforms themselves liable for user-generated content. And you start to then see the Nordic model come out, which is punishing the kind of end user for buying porn, but not necessarily legal for selling it, or buying porn, rather, buying sex.
Yeah.
And you start to see those laws come out that make it much more difficult and much more dangerous, because then they're going to have to be in these environments that are much unsafer, and they're not able to operate an OnlyFans or a platform like that quite as easily. I mean, there was however many months ago when OnlyFans declared that they were going to get away from sexuality, and everybody just kind of laughed at them for it. But they also are kind of getting hit with the scrutiny of, well, this, and then their payment processors are also, like Visa and MasterCard and all those, are also giving them hell. So, these sexual oriented businesses have to kind of exist in this dog eat dog like environment, so to speak. And so we punish them. I mean, frankly, that's what it is. And we punish sexuality. And for some reason, and I have so many theories I could talk about hours about like why I think sex work itself is criminalized. But I won't get into that. You don't have enough time.
Tease me now. But it's interesting, and I remember learning this, a few years ago, that when you think about it, the porn or sex industry is definitely one of the most innovative in the world. So the reason that DVDs and Blu-rays took off like crazy was because of the porn industry. They were the first massive adopters of Blu-ray. They've been some of the first adopters of virtual reality. And again with the OnlyFans, so they'll find another way to progress the platform, because they're so innovative in getting the message, the images, the videos to people. And so it'd be interesting to see what comes next. But I do hope that it does become more and more in control of the creators, as opposed to big corporations. I do hope that. One of the things you mentioned at the beginning, which was very interesting, and something you really don't hear much about, or certainly don't see much about, is disability and sexuality, disability and sex. And I do think there's perhaps a very mistaken perception of, if somebody is disabled in whatever way, somehow their sex drive's been taken away. I mean, you see it in general. If somebody's in a wheelchair with somebody else, people generally talk to the person that's not in a wheelchair about the person in the wheelchair. And think about anything. Oh, what does she want to drink? Does he want something to eat? And think, well, fucking hell, I'm sat here. Well, of course I want something to eat.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think there's almost that, if something physical is a challenge, whether it be somebody, I don't know, it's amputee or it's disabled in any way, somehow it's almost seen as, right, yep, their sexuality piece has been taken out. And first of all, I'm sure you'll know this, why? Why is that? Why do people think that way? And then secondly, how do we help get better representation or get people, just seeing people with disabilities no differently when it comes to sex and sexuality?
Yeah, I think we often, as a society, infantilize people with disabilities.
Yes.
We don't give them the credence of, looking at their resilience, first of all. The fact that they're able to exist in their day to day, dealing with all the things they deal with,
Mhm.
that in and of itself is something to be in awe of. But also just understanding that sexuality is like a human thing. It has nothing to do with disability. It has nothing to do with anything. Every human, unless you're asexual, sexuality is part of their life. And frankly, even with asexual people, I would argue that sexuality is part of their life. They just choose not to partake, which
Yeah.
is totally valid. Um, so yeah, I think kind of getting away from infantilizing people with disabilities. And the way that we do that is more representation. So making accessibility not just an afterthought. Often I see, and a lot of events do this, is they don't think about how do we make this more accessible for people with disabilities until the disabled person comes to them and is like, hey, I can't access this.
Mhm.
And then they kind of put together what they can. And in most cases, they can't do anything or they do very little. Every single time, the disabled person has to be the one to advocate for themselves. But the reality is, accessibility needs to be the forefront thought. When you go to a venue and you're looking, and the first way to get inside is through a set of stairs, you have to think to yourself, as an event organizer, as a leader, as really a human, that, well, this can't be accessible for a lot of people.
Yeah.
This potentially could even be a fire hazard. This is
Mm.
potentially dangerous. And you have to think about it in an expansive way. Um, and also, I think open communication about things. So, one of the things I often tell organizers for events is you want to give all the information about the event that you can. So, measure the restroom entrance size, put that on the website. Tell how many restrooms there are. Talk about the lighting. Talk about all these different elements because you may not think about it, but somebody does, and somebody needs to have that information. So yeah, I would say just taking an accessibility forward mindset is really what makes disabled people much more visible. And once they're more visible, we stop infantilizing them. We stop objectifying them and looking at them as if they're just not human. And that in and of itself will also kind of bring in the reality that they're sexual beings like the rest of us.
Definitely. And I think some of that comes down to how we self-define sex. And I think
I agree.
I'm sure for a lot of people, I'm not sure who a lot of people are, sex is penetration. Typically, penis and vagina ejaculation. That is sex, which is literally the furthest thing from the truth. Really, I mean that's why I sort of I get a bit annoyed when people talk about foreplay, because it almost feels like, well, that's the starter. We'll do a bit of that, then we'll go into the main course. And the foreplay itself, kissing or stroking or holding or just looking at somebody, for goodness sake, can be incredibly sexual. You don't even need to touch somebody to have an amazing sexual experience. I identify as sapiosexual. I get really turned on by intelligence and by people that have huge amount of knowledge. And yeah, I can feel incredibly aroused without ever touching somebody. And I think that's where, like say, if we have the education in school, at the very best it is, well, here's what happens. The man puts his penis to the woman's vagina and ejaculates, and that's what happens. And it's a shame that that's the sort of definition that we seem to be stuck with, really.
Yeah.
If you were to, just throw this one at you, if you were to create a new dictionary definition of sex, what would it look like? Maybe
Yeah. I'm
instead of
smiling because I've been asked this before at a conference and
okay,
I had no idea how to define it. The more I thought about it, the more I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know, but I'll do my best. I would say sex is intimacy, intentional intimacy. And that also includes solo sex in that
yeah,
same definition. Um, But yeah, because it can be anything from even just looking into your partner's eyes is very intimate. And that could be part of a sexual experience. So yeah, I would say intentional intimacy is how I would define sex, and how what anything else you put under that umbrella is completely yours to define, and
Mm.
that's still valid.
Do you think sex is about pleasure?
I think it can be. It doesn't always have to be. There are plenty of asexual people who have sex because they want to like be in service to or give to their partner, but they
Mm.
may not necessarily be enjoying it, or they may not necessarily be deriving pleasure from it, but they're deriving pleasure from their partner's pleasure. So
Mm.
yeah, I don't think it necessarily has to be about pleasure, but it certainly can be.
Mm. And I think the piece said there about how intimacy can be, it can be solo intimacy, and it's, and I don't know why I didn't think this, but I talked to somebody, a somatic healer, a few months ago, and she was saying that it's amazing how many, well, maybe not, how many people, how many women perhaps in particular, have never used a mirror to look at their own vulva and see what's going on down there. Whereas for guys, it's there, you can't really avoid it.
Yeah.
And we're just very curious as guys. And then I think, secondly, that again, women in particular have never spent just an hour or 2 hours either laying or sitting or whatever by themselves, just exploring their own bodies. And knowing that actually, yeah, actually, I do love having my ear touched or my neck stroked or whatever. Oh no, I hate that when somebody touches my elbow or whatever. And it's crazy when you think about it. Something that is an important part of our lives, hopefully, and we haven't explored ourselves. And she was saying she went through a practice on this course that she did, where she, where the guide, well, she had lots of observed masturbation, I guess. So she was being observed by somebody else sort of doing it, and yeah, that was incredible to turn on. But I do think, yeah, we sort of, masturbation feels like a thing we do was when we were much younger, just our first thing. Then we get sort of past that and on to the next thing. Whereas it can be such an incredible experience, but we were never told it's okay to explore our own bodies. We were almost told
Yeah.
that that's dirty. Take your hands away from there. What do you think you're doing? Whereas, and then maybe that sticks with us as society's view of touching or being with ourselves as being a very negative thing.
Yeah, I would agree. It is very much we're discouraged from doing so, and I think pleasure mapping is what I call it.
Yeah.
That's not my term, but it's
Mhm.
um, mapping out your body and figuring out where the pleasure zones are, however they look, wherever they are. Um, is such an important practice. And I think that it first starts with yourself. And from there, you can always invite a partner into that exploration. And that also is a very fun, intimate activity, could be defined as sex even. But yeah, I would agree that it's so important to have that self exploration. And yet we are discouraged from that.
Mm. In the UK, a lot of the news that we get tends to be what's happening in the US, because you're far more
Yeah.
interested than we are, and especially over the last 6 months, and then sort of 4 years ago, we've had a lot of noise about different political policies and different ways of thinking, etc. And one of the big things that we have heard about here, and I've seen in practice in big corporations, is how the government is trying to change the SG towards DEI. And I wondered how, well, first of all, how do you integrate diversity, equity, inclusion principles into your workshops and the work that you do? And then secondly, is your hope that this will be very much a 4-year thing, then we'll go, not necessarily back, but then we'll somehow find a comfortable place with DEI and what it's supposed to represent?
Yeah. So I think that the first thing it comes with kind of including it and trying to be mindful of it
Yeah.
is looking at the pictures. Media literacy is so important for this very reason, is you see who is not represented here,
Mhm.
who is out of the picture, and why is that so? Is there an intention with that? And so when you start first by asking that question, you can start to say, well, let me invite them to this. So it's very intentional invitation of people often marginalized that you can invite to this conversation. And the wealth of knowledge that they bring is invaluable. They are the ones that are going to kind of inform you, and you should compensate them fairly for this. They're going to inform you of like the areas in your presentation, your workshop, whatever you're doing, that perhaps need more representation. Also, think about the examples you use, the pictures you use even. I look at the stock photos and I say, you know what, there's nobody Black in this. There's nobody disabled in this. And so it takes a while to find some, but there are some resources. Actually, on my website, I have an accessibility hub, and there's places where you can find stock photos that are inclusive on there. So I intentionally seek that out and put that in my presentation. I intentionally include sections on, well, if you have mobility issues, here's how to do, X position. And so it takes just asking yourself first, who isn't here and why are they not here? Let me invite them in and see what they say. The biggest, I think, key to DEI in general is in diversity and inclusion, and asking them what their needs are. They're going to be the ones to kind of bring that information in. And then do I think we're going to kind of go back to it? I think so, because I think it's something unavoidable. If we want to have new ideas, I mean, DEI if I just kind of boil it down and take the social importance out of it, it's good for business. You have creative ideas, you have, brilliant people come in of all identities. You need that for business. You need that for life, really. So I think we are going to go back, because we're going to bring those people in, and with them, they're going to have different needs and they're going to bring different ideas. And so that's going to kind of breed this environment for DEI. I don't know if it'll ever be as formalized as it was, but I think eventually we'll get back to it. At least I certainly hope we do. I would say the most that I've learned, in terms of the most impactful things I've learned, have been from Black women. And I can speak to that personally.
Do you personally feel less safe now than you did last year?
Absolutely. I'm the daughter of immigrants, and even though I am a citizen, I mean, if ICE decides to detain me, they literally are kidnapping people and putting them in prisons, jails, people's basements even. I've read about that. And so by the time you're able to prove your citizenship, I'd have to dig up my birth certificate and all of that. I mean, it could be weeks that I would be in who knows where. So yeah, absolutely. I am terrified. Even traveling internationally to see my partner, I was prepared to have my phone searched. I was prepared to be searched, all of it. Especially because my last name literally has Arab in it. So I'm Middle Eastern, I'm Iranian. And so the tensions there are only going to get worse too. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so sorry to hear that. And and that's what I think we struggle with a bit in the UK to understand, is that our onus in the UK and in America, I guess, has always been innocent until proven guilty. It's always been the thing. But it seems to be now where the onus is on you to prove that you belong. We've had stories over here of people being shipped off to Ecuadorian prisons and lost, and then nobody knows quite where they are, and they're trying to come back once you're there. It seems to be almost impossible. And the courts, obviously, with the Supreme Court being 6-3, it's going to be pretty difficult to change anything. So it does feel unnerved, to say the least, at the moment.
Absolutely.
Yeah. One of the things that we both talked about, I guess, a little bit, is how media has or does represent different perceptions of sexuality and kink. And an example came up the last week or so, and forgive my ignorance, I'm going to get the names wrong, I'm sure, but it was either Sabrina Carpenter or one of that genre of female pop stars that had an album cover, and she was on the cover with her hair being pulled by a guy, or being in a sort of submissive pose, and she gets so much shit for that.
Yeah.
Oh, this is putting women back millions of years, and we've fought to get there with equity and parity with men, etc. And it just, it's almost that. Well, it's not almost. It's that view that choosing to be in a submissive position or have a submissive encounter, whether you're male or female, seems to really really upset people, especially with young females. Oh, we've worked so hard to get you all these rights and everything. You're giving it away by being on a record cover, by having your hair pulled by a guy. Who do you think you are? And I really struggle with that. So I was talking to my daughter about it, and she's doing philosophy and psychology, and she's very thoughtful about all this stuff. And her big focus is gender studies and things. And she was trying to explain to me that it isn't that they're not, that she isn't trying to say, hey, I want to give away all my rights, but it's just that particular thing she's doing. And I wonder how. Well, first of all, the media all leapt on that as the narrative, how terrible it was she was doing this, as opposed to that whole thing about, well, that's her choice. And do you think we'll ever get past that?
I certainly hope so. Because that album cover brought out all the SWERFs, the sex worker exclusionary radical feminists.
Cool.
And I bring it out specifically. I bring that up specifically because, again, that choice of what to do with your body. You have plenty of feminists, and I identify as a feminist, who think that stay-at-home mom is the worst thing you can do for the feminist movement. But the reality is that we fought for the right for women to do what they want with their minds, their bodies, their lives. And that includes being a submissive. That includes being a career-powered, driven person. It includes all of that. So we can't have one or the other. It has to be all of it. And just because you disagree doesn't mean that you have to live that. They say that set back women 100 years. Well, my life wasn't set back 100 years. It was a headline blip for, a couple of weeks, and that was about it. So I think that people often over exaggerate, and it's unfortunate. I do hope that we eventually get to a point where sexuality isn't quite as frankly discriminated against. It's funny. There's a story I'll tell you. I was at a party one time, and it was kind of a mixed crowd in terms of age. And so I ended up talking to about 4 or 5 women who were boomer generation. And we were talking about feminism, and we were all there for it until I said the word slut. And they came unglued. They said, well, yes, you young people are trying to reclaim that word, but in reality, it's regressive. It works. And I said, well, it's a 4-letter word like any other, just like the word cunt. And as soon as I said that, they were done. They walked away from me. But the reality is that you're still saying that a woman is controlled by her sexuality. And if her sexuality isn't deemed to be pure, then she's somehow lesser. That seems to be anti-feminism. And that's where purity culture comes in and has tainted a lot of all of that. So I certainly hope we get past purity culture. That is my wish.
I'm not sure if you remember this. Do you remember when Miley Cyrus did the VMAs?
Yeah.
Robin Thicke. I mean, wow. I think part of it is that people love to put on this veneer of moral outrage.
Yeah.
And they're the ones at home that are watching the video over and over again and are sort of searching for pictures of Miley Cyrus in a sort of bikini or whatever. It's the sort of veneer of moral outrage. Oh my God, that's terrible. I can't believe you watched that. Show me again. It's weird. I've been a stay-at-home dad for a few years now. And I still get, if I go to a party or a barbecue or whatever, and people say, what are you doing? Banker, or finance, what are you doing? I'm a stay-at-home dad. Oh, okay. And they still feel like nothing else to talk about. I have got other things I can say. It's not just my wife goes out, she has a great career, we made a big decision, I've done it, I sort of burnt out to a certain degree, and she's carried on and she's loving it, and we're both super happy. But there's that feeling, and I talked to a really wonderful dominatrix in Poland a few months ago called Alexa, and she was saying a lot of men that come to her, and again, it's not she said a lot of the time it's not about the physical act that people might imagine. It's that they fear that they can't talk to their partners about, that they desire just to be submissive. Not all the time, but just they want to be a switch, but they want to be. But a lot of people happy with a switch as long as that means you're always sort of dominant. That doesn't quite work. But if you want to be submissive, or say to your partner, I'm so exhausted at work, I'm in charge of 1,000 people, I'm doing this, and it's just so lovely to come home and just lose or cede control to you. But she says so many men just don't feel comfortable doing that. And she said it's amazing how many of those guys are 25, 28, 30, 35. It's not, people might always say, oh, blokes going to see this gorgeous young dominatrix. It isn't. It's just back to that communication thing again. That person you're perhaps closest to, your partner or one of your partners, but it was terrible fear because of society, whether it be stay-at-home dad or a submissive man or whatever. There's just this thought that somehow that's not very masculine, is it? That's not a very manly thing to do. It's which again is driven by the press and the media.
Absolutely. And I think it's partially driven by misogyny as well, because the act of bisexual men in particular, and gay men often get this as well, but the act of potentially being penetrated, being the bottom, so to speak, being the one that's doing the woman's role, is the negative. And so I think that stems from internalized misogyny.
It's very funny. It's sort of sad funny in a way. So I talked to a guy called Lilith Foxx about 3 weeks ago. He's an Australian gay porn content creator, and he actually died about 10 days ago, very sadly. And he was always the bottom, but he was this huge, beefy, chunky, big biceps, works out, like an Arnold Schwarzenegger kind of guy.
Yeah.
And he said, I love nothing more than being a slut and being passed around other guys. He said, but when somebody sees me, they assume that, well, you can't be the bottom. It's like, well, why? Just because I look, and he was this real big sort of bear type character, such an interesting guy. But again, it's that assumption that, well, he must be the sort of weedy, or you must have been sort of forced to be the bottom. It's almost like that prison thing. If you're going to prison as a sort of slim guy, you're going to become somebody's bitch or whatever. It's just, he said, I love that. But he's this huge, big bicep, massive neck, rugby player type physique and stuff. Just a very, just not what you would expect to represent that if you believe what the media has to say, etc.
Yeah.
If you're, and there's probably going to be a million of these things now, if people listen to this and want to explore more, and perhaps, first of all, to explore their own sexuality, to understand what the alternative or kink scene might look like, well, first of all, I'd send them to your website. I think it's very informative. But secondly, where else would you send people? Assuming you're not sending them straight to a FetLife event where they're described as an exotic beauty. We sort of avoid that side of things. And where would you start them off?
If they want to learn more about sexuality, so there's lots of really amazing resources. Scarleteen.com is targeted toward teens, but it's got a lot of really good information that's very approachable. And I think they also have a lot of stuff on consent. And I think we all need to start there, because that's when we were effectively stunted, was really in our teens, when we were coming of age and wanting to learn more about ourselves and sexuality. So I love Scarleteen for that reason. If you follow me on Instagram at the Lilith Foxx, I also follow a lot of really incredible other sex educators who do amazing work. I also post things and do work, although social media is not really my game. But I do have some colleagues like the Sex Ed Files, Mariah. She's incredible. She does a lot of videos where she explains things. She's very bubbly, very easy to listen to, and everything. There's Sex Ed Princess is also another one. Jill, she's amazing as well. Makes a lot of great content. So I would say go toward Instagram to start. You wouldn't think so, because there's a lot of censorship. So we have to get creative with how we talk about things. But
I thought when I first saw SEGS, SEGGS, it was a stunt. Right. And picture of a bee and then DSM. I quite like that. Yeah. The creativity of to get around.
Yeah, it's a challenge, and that's Fosta Sesta that does that.
So in the line of work that's chosen you, you obviously talk to people, and I'm sure there are in your own life as well, people that have been through trauma, have some difficult situations, and I guess the last thing you want to do as somebody trying to help is to carry somebody else's trauma, because trauma can be very heavy. How do you look after your own mental, I guess, and physical? How do you look after your own well-being so that you're in a good place for turning it for people?
That's a good question, because I do put everything of myself into what I do, and so I do carry a lot of that trauma a lot of times. I see a therapist regularly, which is really important, and she is herself kinky and polyamorous and all of those things, and so she understands where I'm coming from. I also find that community is so important more than anything. I am in a group chat with hundreds of other sex educators, and we all help each other out. And that has been so healing for me and so impactful. I also talk to my partners about it and my friends. I'm very fortunate in that I can be out about what I do. Most of my friends, if not all of them, either are kinky or know that I am. So I'm able to tell them about my work and about the struggles that I face. But I would say if I had to choose the one thing that was the most impactful, it's community. We are social creatures and we thrive in community and other people, and trying to be in quote competition with my other sex educators isn't going to get me anywhere.
No. And if somebody perhaps, again, has listened to this or has stumbled across this or has read something you've written and is considering going to talk to a sex educator or a sort of sex therapist, but they fear that what they're going to talk about is very odd and it's too much of a kink or whatever, do you think there's many things that you that you haven't heard, that things that people might think, oh wow, this is really out there, just perhaps other people have had the same feelings, same sensations before as well?
Yeah, I mean, you're allowed to have your own boundaries. In fact, you should. I think in that case, you should never shame someone. Validate their existence, validate their experience, but don't be afraid to give them a referral to somebody who you know would be able to handle whatever it is. I had a client come in who was having ideations about sleeping with minor children. And that is something that I not only personally struggle with and I'm unable to really work with, I just don't have the experience. And
Yeah.
so while I made sure I didn't make a face or anything like that when he told me, I referred him to a colleague of mine who does specifically work with individuals who struggle with that. And had I immediately been, oh, you're a criminal and whatever else, he would have gone into the closet and not sought out help. And, who knows, could have potentially harmed a child down the line. So the fact that he was seeking out help is really important. And so it's our job, not just as sex educators, but I think as people really to understand and see their humanity first and foremost, and then get them the help they need, with whether that's through me or through someone else that I know.
That's where that community piece comes to plan.
Yeah.
If you didn't have 500 people in your WhatsApp group that maybe of those 10 people could help, you where do you send somebody? Because a lot of traditional therapists, haven't been guided as to how to talk about sex and sexuality in many
Yeah,
ways.
absolutely.
And they very much keep it in the head. They don't go sort of through the somatic practice of understanding where the body comes into it.
Yeah, even marriage and family therapists, which you would think sex is a big part of that, they don't get any kind of, to my knowledge, any kind of additional sex training. That's why organizations like ASECT are so important, because they bring that conversation to the table. And it only makes you as a therapist much more valuable in terms of the work that you bring if you seek out certification. And I know that's not always accessible to everybody, but even just being in that community and finding those resources is also important.
I love how obvious it is that you love what you do and what you say.
Thank you.
You really, even if you were trying to hide it, you've got no chance whatsoever. I've taken a lot of time, so sorry, but just two more.
No, it's okay. I'm enjoying this.
And the first one isn't meant as a sort of voyeuristic question, so let me pose it before being offended. But I wonder if you could describe a favorite sexual encounter, not what happened, but what was the setting, the build up, the mood, the feeling. How did that come about?
Yeah. I can think of one in particular, and it was a kink scene, and it was one of my first kink scenes with this person. It was actually with two people. It wasn't so much a sexual experience, but it felt like sex because it was so intimate. I was being whipped, and I had just met this person, and it was this person and my partner. and the two of them like kind of co-top whipping me. And I couldn't hear any of the music going on. I was so entranced and so into the experience that somebody could have been talking to me and I wouldn't have realized it. That one comes to mind. And I know that's kink specific, but sex, another experience comes to mind with a former partner of mine, where we just kind of gave into the primal animalistic desires, and we had music going, and we're not really holding back and weren't trying to moan like they do in porn, and it was just very visceral and very intense, and it felt incredible because we weren't holding back. And so that was, I think, kind of the one I would point to.
And how important is trust in a sexual encounter for you?
Very important. I think if I don't trust the person, I shouldn't be having sex with them, or shouldn't be intimate with them on that level at the very least.
And then my final question would be, what do you... So, no, let me rephrase that. So you've literally dived into this. You haven't dipped your toe in the shallow end and sort of paddled and waded. You've literally gone into it full bore. You gave up a successful career. You decided this is what it is. Oh, this has been decided for you. So you've done a huge amount already, a huge amount in terms of what you've achieved in such a short period of time.
Thank you.
Do you have a view or a feeling as to what the future looks like?
I don't. I was thinking about this the other day too. I'm very open to what it looks like, however it kind of manifests. My next venture is I start grad school in August. I'm going for a degree in public health, a master's degree, which is public health is a whole thing right now in politics because they're gutting it. But I think by the time I graduate, we'll be hopefully coming out of it, and we'll desperately need people in public health. I just knew I didn't want to be a therapist, and people in my field either are therapists or they're in public health. And so I'm hoping my degree will give me the resources and tools to be able to bring education to the masses. My specialization is in behavioral health and health promotion. So I'm really excited about that. So I imagine what it'll look like is probably I'll have more resources at my disposal, more tools. And I'll just keep doing the work I'm doing. I love teaching workshops. That's my bread and butter. So I imagine much more education, much more teaching and connecting with people, collaborating with people as well.
I just finished a master's in behavior change.
Oh, congratulations.
I literally got the final sort of board approval or whatever sign off on Monday. So
oh wow, congratulations.
Very exciting. So I thought partly did it so my children couldn't say, "Oh, homework's important." I said, "Look, I'm doing my homework." So they have to sit down to theirs. But it was fabulous. And I think one of the big things is, how do you help people change their behaviors in so many ways, in their sexual practices, in their eating habits, in their everything. It's such a big topic. But I loved it. I'm looking for the next thing now, so I really loved it. And from a personal perspective, what do you feel the future holds?
I think the future holds for me lots of more wonderful experiences with my friends, with my partners, watching sunsets, traveling, all those wonderful things. That's what I hope it holds. I'm very fortunate that my work is fully remote. I can work from anywhere. So that also helps. And I think in terms of, where I am personally, it's just so many more memory building, like wonderful experiences with the people I care about.
A fabulous answer. Thank you for all of your answers. You've been, more than I hoped for, and I hope for a lot.
Thank you so much.
So no, you're lovely to talk to. And I really mean it. You have, and if it's like if you sort of divide achievements by days, then I think you've probably achieved more than most people I've ever met. So you've done a huge amount in the short period of time you've been doing this. So I look forward to seeing what you do in the next 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. Oh my goodness, who knows?
Thank you. Looking forward to it as well.
Pleasure. Take care.
Thank you so much.